Guys, today we're going to talk about how to go after ambitious goals and fail again and again without burning yourself out. So here's the double bind that many people get into when it comes to ambitious goals. On the one hand, they really want to achieve the goal. All they want to do is launch their startup or hit their targets for this year or get everything on their to-do list done for today. On the other hand, they're terrified of failing. More specifically, they're terrified of how they will feel if they fail. Because it's not the bad result itself that's terrifying per se. What's really scary is the embarrassment, shame, disappointment, regret, inadequacy, stress, or any other really not fun emotion that you tend to feel when you get a bad result. But here's the unfortunate truth. Achieving ambitious goals requires failure. Making lots of mistakes, getting lots of bad results, and learning the lesson from each one is the only way to figure out how to succeed. It's extremely annoying, but it's true. Which means that deep desire to achieve a goal plus fear of failing at it equals a lose-lose situation. When you have a deep desire and fear of failure, your only two options are either to one, not try at all, which means you avoid your fear, but your desire also goes unfulfilled. Or option number two, to burn yourself out in the pursuit, which means you have a chance of fulfilling your desire, but constantly worrying about failure and beating yourself up after every failure burns you out the whole way there. So here's how you break out of this lose-lose situation and go after ambitious goals and fail again and again without burning yourself out. What you have to do is find sufficiency in the worst case scenario. Let me tell you what I mean. I did this when I first considered starting my business. My worst case scenario when I started my business was I failed for 5 years straight. I make no money whatsoever, or just not enough to really make this a full-time career. I keep living with my parents the entire time. And at the end of 5 years, I go get another corporate job. And looking at that worst case scenario, I decided two things. First off, in terms of external consequences, it wasn't that bad. My corporate career trajectory would be slowed down. I would miss out on the years of earning a salary that I could have earned in that time. And both of those were totally fine by me. And second, and more importantly, I found internal sufficiency in this scenario, by which I mean, I decided that I would still be good enough, even if all that stuff happened. If I tried different things for 5 years straight and I never made it work, I would be so proud of myself for even trying. And I would have put the what if scenario of my dream fully to bed, and I would die without regrets. And I'd go back to the corporate workforce with conviction that it was the right decision for me. I wouldn't be doing it out of fear because I was too scared to even try doing my own thing. I would be doing it with data and lived experience because I genuinely thought that it was the right move. So I didn't start my business thinking I have to make this succeed. Otherwise, this will be a huge, embarrassing disaster. That's too much pressure. And I also didn't start it thinking, who cares if this succeeds or not? It just doesn't even matter anyway. That's too little pressure. I started it thinking, hey, even the worst case scenario isn't that bad. There's only upside here. So let's relax and have some fun with this, which is just the right amount of pressure. And when I relaxed and just had fun with it, I made six figures in my first year in business. I'm also still doing this now as I look at my revenue goal for this year. My goal for this year was to double my revenue from last year. And if I look at my numbers so far and extrapolate them forward, I'm not on track to do that. The extrapolation says I'm on track for 1.6x of last year's revenue. And if you ask me, what do you feel like you can definitely achieve this year? My answer would be 1.3x of last year's revenue. And so I'm finding sufficiency in my worst case scenario. There'd be no real external consequences. I'd still be making enough to cover my expenses. And I'm pre-deciding what my internal consequences would be. I'm imagining ending the year at my worst case scenario results, and I'm deciding ahead of time how I would react to that and what I would make that mean about me. If I don't plan it out, my brain's automatic reaction would be, you're a failure. You've hit your ceiling. You thought you could make this a big business, but the reality is this is all you've got. This is your limit. That will be accompanied by feelings like shame and embarrassment and inadequacy, all of which would make me want to run and hide and never show my face again. Or even worse, keep building my business, but with the belief that this is as good as it gets and I've already hit my limit. My brain is already pre-imagining this result and already pre-feeling all these feelings. These thoughts and emotions will infuse the whole rest of my year if I'm not careful. So instead, I looked at my worst case scenario right in the eye and I decided how I will react to it if it happens. And I decided if it happens, it will be interesting. because I had a plan for what I was going to do differently this year versus last year. And I had a theory that these changes would create double the revenue. And if I find out that my theory was wrong and that these changes only generate 1.3x the revenue, that is interesting. And I could sit down and analyze, first of all, how well did I execute my plan? Was the lower than expected result because of spotty execution? And if so, that's the first thing I could work on. And I could also figure out, what else could I do? What other dials could I turn on this machine to get a different result? I can immediately think of probably 5 or 10 things I could do differently in my sales and marketing, which is great. So how can I experiment with all of those things and see what results they create? So as I look at the rest of the year, I'm not saying to myself, I have to hit my revenue goals. Otherwise, I'm a catastrophic, embarrassing failure. That's too much pressure. And I'm also not saying, don't look at the numbers. It doesn't matter how much money I make this year. That's too little pressure. Instead, I'm saying the worst case scenario is an interesting learning that sets me up to try even more things next year. There's only upside here. So let's keep having fun with this, which is just the right amount of pressure. And when I relax and when I have fun with it, I have more ideas for what I can do now to change my results for this year. And I have more of a desire to start trying them out today. And I also did this today when I was super off track with my to-do list, because this concept isn't just for big life decisions or quarterly plans. It's also for your day-to-day. So by the time I hit 6 p.m. today, I was massively off track on my to-do list. My plan had been to knock out some admin, work on the course I'm building for you guys, and then publish a new newsletter. And at 6 p.m., I had done a small portion of the admin, and I hadn't even touched the course or the newsletter. And my brain wanted to go into full freakout mode. It was like, oh my God, you are so behind. This is a disaster. What are you doing? You're such a lazy slob. But guess what? Yelling at myself doesn't make me want to work. I was already feeling kind of crappy, which is why I'd been struggling to work in the first place. And telling myself I was a horrible human being only made me feel crappier, which only made doing work feel even more impossible. So I found sufficiency in the worst case scenario. My worst case scenario for today was to relax, do nothing for the rest of the day, and then republish one of my old articles before going to bed. And I looked at that scenario and I said, yes, that would be totally fine. The external consequences of that would be okay. None of my admin is urgent. The course can survive one day without me working on it. And people genuinely appreciate it when I republish old articles and old videos. Either they hadn't seen them before, or they take something new from it the second time they take a look at it. I've published almost 250 original pieces of content since I started my business. Even I don't remember everything I've said. And more importantly, I decided that I would still be okay as a human being if that's what happened today. My struggle to work today didn't come from laziness or complacency. I love working. When I'm happy and I'm firing on all cylinders, I have to make sure I don't work too much, not too little. But I've had a rough couple of days. A few things really triggered my "you're doing it wrong" fear monster that lives in my head, and my inner critic has just been beating me up nonstop for about 48 hours. It's not going to last forever. I will get out of it. I always do. But I also can't snap my fingers and just snap out of it in an instant. I might be able to do that one day, but today is not that day. Sometimes it just takes some time to fully process and work through an inner critic flare-up event and come out on the other side. It's not a problem. It just is what it is. Every time I take my time and work through it, I'm shortening the cycle for next time. And in that context, I decided that following my brain's lead, trusting myself, giving my brain time to relax and recover and come back to normal, and just republishing one of my old articles before going to bed would be enough. And guess what happened? When I found sufficiency in the worst case scenario, and I dropped the unhelpful extra pressure on myself, suddenly my brain had an idea for a new piece of content, this video that we're watching right now. And I started sketching it out while I was watching TV. Then I opened Substack and I started writing it up while my show was playing, paused my show so I could focus and get it done. And now it's done. Not because I pressured and shamed and yelled at myself to do it, but because I removed the shame and created a win-win scenario where I only had upside. When I found sufficiency in the worst case scenario and I relaxed, suddenly my brain found working to be fun again. And I wrote a whole piece, which I wasn't even planning to do. Your relationship with failure is the #1 determinant of whether or not you'll be able to succeed. And your relationship with failure is not rebuilt by watching one video or reading one article. It's rebuilt through deliberate practice in your actual life. And the best way to get that practice in a structured way that ensures that you actually cross the finish line is hiring a coach. So let's get started today. Go to the link above and book a free coaching consult.